So today we're going to talk about what to do when you do not get the job. So if you think about the job search as a journey, it has its ups and downs. It's not an easy journey for most of us. If you're serious about it, preparing to interview for a job is really hard work. It doesn't come naturally to us because we don't do it all the time, thank goodness. Now, if you were to ask several folks that you know that have those good jobs that you like, or some job that you aspire to, I can promise you, most people are going to tell you that they had to try more than one time to get the job that they have today. In the end, it's really going to pay off and it's worth it. Hi, if you're new here, welcome. I'm Tina C. I'm a job search strategist and I love providing people with tips for their personal and their career development. I've interviewed hundreds of people and I consult with people to help them to take their career to the next level. So let's get started. Let's say you've applied for a job and it's an external job. It means you don't work for the company today. So sometimes you may not ever hear from the company again. Sometimes you may get a letter. If you're really, really lucky, somebody will contact you and they will provide you with feedback. What I'm going to encourage you to do at this point, though, is to pay attention to the feedback you've gotten, maybe take notes, but then step back, take a break, give yourself a break. It's always disappointing to not get that job, so you want to let that emotion subside and that disappointment. Now it's time to get to work. The thing you don't want to do is do nothing. So I mentioned that the job search is a journey, and it really is. Now, if you're one of those people who's lucky enough to apply for a job and you got it on the first try, well, kudos to you, but that's not the experience that most people have. So again, ask most people about their journey for the job that they have today or how they got to where they are today, and it took multiple attempts. There's a lot of effort that goes into it. Bottom line is you must be willing to do the work. Okay, so this work includes the need to, first of all, reflect. You can always take something away from the experience that you just had. The next thing is to regroup. You want to get started again. You want to go back to the drawing board, and this is only going to help you to get better the next time. The last step is going to be just enhancing your interview skills, and this is going to require preparation and practice. So let's focus on reflecting. So I think the smart thing to do is to think about those questions that you answered during your interview. There are going to be some questions that you answered and you feel like you did a great job. Check those off as a win. There are going to be some where you feel like, I didn't do as well as I could have. And that's fine. Consider the questions that sort of caught you off guard, that you weren't expecting. And so you're probably not as happy with your answer for those either. So if your feedback included someone telling you that maybe you didn't have the skills that they wanted for the job, maybe you didn't demonstrate the behaviors that they were looking for, it may sound crazy, but really this is a good thing because they're giving you something tangible that you can work on. And so my best advice to you is to sit down, come up with a plan for how you're going to conquer that. And you really can't do that by yourself because you can't do that in a silo because you're going to need to either go to your boss or someone you trust. Because especially your boss is going to be able to help you come up with that plan. Because when you've got to work on your skills, that's a heavy lift. But don't be discouraged because you can do it. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time, but you can come up with a plan. So your feedback may have been that you didn't have the strongest answers. So think about that. Sometimes you may have been too wordy, maybe not wordy enough. Sometimes people will tell you maybe you didn't give enough detail. There are times when you're going to feel like, I don't think my answers were robust enough. Sometimes people will tell you that your answers weren't complex enough. They're looking for you to have had a more complex experience. So that's okay. Take those examples and then figure out how can you build on that or how can you work on coming up with better examples. So the key to a really good interview is being a good storyteller. So one of the things that could easily happen to you is you're real proud of your answer, but you may not have answered the question. And believe me, I run into this all the time. So one of the reasons that this happens is people work really hard to come up with the examples that they think they're going to need for the interview. And then you hear a question, it's kind of close to that example that you put together, and so you think, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to use it, but it really doesn't answer the question. And the key to conquering this is being able to hone in on those keywords in the question. So a telltale sign of when you may not have gotten it right with that answer is that you maybe are not using some of those same keywords that were a part of the question that the interviewer asked you. So I'm going to give you some examples. So you may be confronted with a question that says, tell me about a time where you proactively initiated something that it was a relationship, but it was outside of your normal work group. So I'll tell you, the key words that you want to pick up on there are that you were proactive. It wasn't something that somebody asked you to do, you initiated that action. The other key words are that it was someone outside of your work group. So if you start to tell the story and you say, oh yeah, I was working on this with my peer, okay, that doesn't fit. But if you're purposely saying, oh yeah, there's another work group that I was connected to because of such and such, and so what I did was, then you're on the right track. So another example is when you're asked to share an example of maybe a problem that you solved, and you thought you solved it, but then you ended up finding out that you really didn't dig into the root cause of the problem. So your keywords there were something that, a process change maybe that you initiated. Remember, it has to be something that you worked on, not that someone else worked on. And then also, you're actually going to highlight that, I thought I solved that problem, but I didn't really get to the root cause. So that, make sure you key in on that. Now with those type of examples where you maybe haven't done as well as you intended, be sure you have a resolution for that. Be sure you have a comeback. Be sure to be able to say, well, this is how I recovered, or this is what I learned from it. You always want to be able to do that. So the last example is describe a time when you had a big impact on the daily work activities of your group. So think about that big impact. Don't give an example of something like, oh, I put a meeting together, or I did this, and it was really a simple activity. They're looking for big impact. So this one, you can make sure that you're on the right track by saying in the end, so the impact of my group, or this really helped us with such and such. That helps you lead that interviewer to, this is what you were asking me for. So using your strongest, more complex answers can be a challenge. So I'm going to share with you an example of maybe the best way to do that. So we all work on solving problems, but I'm going to give you an example of a couple of problems that you could be confronted with and which one you would probably want to use in your interview, which one you'd be more likely to use in your interview. So say you have an example of you were in charge, couple of employees called in, and now you're left with not enough people to cover the shift. Okay. Another example could be that you have a supplier that calls you and says, hey, that shipment that you were sending, it's not here, it's late, and now I'm not going to be able to meet my deadline. Now, when you look at those two examples, that latter one is going to be the best one to use. Now, the easiest story to tell might be, oh, you're real proud of covering that shift when those two employees didn't show up. But really, the great example to use is how you saved the day with that supplier who was not going to be able to meet their deadline. So hopefully you see the difference there. So really what I'm trying to say is it's really valuable for you to spend time, and I know it's taxing on your brain to come up with the best examples, but it's really going to pay off in the end. Remember that you're trying to separate yourself from other people in this interview. And so you want to showcase yourself. You want to make them remember you. So always use that best example. And it takes some time to actually sit down and sort of, when you make that list of all your examples, there's going to be some that roll to the top. Use those that are most impressive. Okay, so enhancing your interview skills. We've talked about reflecting. We've talked about regrouping. So now let's talk about what's next. And what's next is really the most important part, because It's really mastering that interview, and really the only way to do that is to practice, to do mock interviews. This is how you're going to gain that experience to really ace that interview. So this is where it's key to have that other party involved. You want someone who's going to be honest with you. Ask the person, hey, am I using the best examples that are going to be impressive? Tell me about my storytelling. Is it good? Am I on point? Let that person help you out. Let them give you that advice. Talking through it is going to help you with narrowing it down to being concise, giving the right details, and that second opinion is going to be really valuable for you. And I talked about earlier using those buzzwords, or using the words that are part of that company's culture, using words that you heard in the questions. Ask that person to remind you if you're doing that, because you won't catch yourself. You're so focused on giving those answers, but they'll be able to tell you if you're hitting the mark on those. So using those words that resonate with the company. If you already work for the company, you know its culture. If you don't work for the company, be sure to go online. Make sure you sort of understand the culture. But using those words that are going to resonate with the interviewer are really key. It's different for every job, so I can't tell you exactly what they are. I'll give you some examples, but you really have to figure those out for yourself. Creativity may be important to the company. Inclusion, it could be being accurate. I don't know if you could apply for a job where you're an auditor, and so that attention to detail is really important. But know what those things are and try to use those buzzwords during your interview. It really will resonate with the interviewer. So I strongly advise that you share your plan with either your boss or someone that you really respect that will support you. This is invaluable because you really do need assistance with this. You cannot do your job search in a silo. Some people may think that they can, but really having that support is really great. So take advantage of that. If you have someone that you really trust that will help you out, do it. If you don't, and you are home and you've got family members, and tell them, hey, I need your help. I need you to sit and listen to me go through my interview. They may not understand what you're talking about. It's okay, just make them listen. At last resort, stand in front of the mirror, tell your story. But saying all of this out loud is really the key. You can read it off a piece of paper all day long, but it's not the same as telling your story. So I strongly encourage you to do that. So I hope all of this has been encouraging for you. I really want you to think about doing this reflection, going through the exercise. It's really important that you set goals, set small achievable goals, and give yourself time to get through that. Find someone that can support you in the process. That's really important. Don't give up. Always remember that this is a journey. It's not easy.